Welcome, everyone. I think this is the last panel before lunch. Hope you're hanging there. And we have three very exciting guests here today from three different countries. So I think I will start by asking why each of you are here, and if you could tell us a bit about what you do, what you invest in, but mostly why Macau? Because and Neil, you flew 12 hours here.
Yeah, okay, so good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. And why Macau? Why? Well, actually, you could flip that and say, why not Macau? You know, the opportunity to actually be here kind of in person after joining the Beyond event for the last couple of years virtually was a bit of a no-brainer, really. So I flew in on Monday, did a few meetings in Hong Kong for a couple of days, came across to Macau. And it's great to kind of be with the team from TechNode. Kind of the story of Beyond is rooted in London, and as somebody who represents London and works for an organisation that promotes London internationally, it's a great story. You know, the two founders, Dr. Liao and Jason, met in London about 7 or 8 years ago. Didn't know each other. They met at London Tech Week. They started chatting. They said, "Well, let's do something together." And 7 years later, we're here in Macau at the first in-person Beyond. So that's why I'm here.
That's a great story, and maybe it's exclusive, like how Dr. Liao and Jason met and how Beyond all got started. How about Tom?
No, I'm delighted to be here because I think certainly from the Malaysian standpoint, we're seeing more and more connectivity between Southeast Asia and particularly the Greater Bay. And I think, we can talk about this later, but I think one day, you know how everybody uses the term GBA? I think it's going to become Greater Bay ASEAN. And I think that's going to be sort of that, the connectivity is growing between those two regions. So that's the reason why I'm here.
Representing Gobi. Okay, Rod.
Hi everyone, I'm Roderick. I'm with East Ventures. I'm from Indonesia. I'm here because Tom invited me to be here, and so thanks Tom for inviting me. I think.
Thanks for coming, Rod.
No, of course, pleasure to be here. I've always gone to, I mean, before the pandemic or whatnot, right? I mean, to Hong Kong and whatnot, and the energy has always been amazing, right? And I think it's exactly the same, right? I mean, this is events are coming back after the pandemic and whatnot. Great to be here in person, right? I think you can see the over the past couple of days or so, right? I think the expo and whatnot. It's just been great, I think, right? I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I'm looking forward to see what this this event the next few years and how it's gonna connect more and more, I think, right? And not just between Asia, but also between Asia, Europe, the rest of the world, and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the UK and Southeast Asia, they're uniquely positioned amid our US-China rising complications in the sense that historically they've been relatively neutral and they work with both sides. And just at the backstage, we're talking about how rising US-China tensions actually create good opportunities for both regions. So how about we start with Southeast Asia? Like, what are you seeing from the local startup ecosystem? Like, how are they adapting to changing US-China relations, and how are investors reacting?
Sure. Maybe just a little bit of context, I guess, right? I mean, it's no public secret that there is tension between US and China, right? I guess, from an ASEAN and specifically Indonesia perspective, right? I think we sit at the unique position, right? I think we try to have a peaceful coexistence where, I think we have relationships with both sides, US and China, and I think we're trying to see whether we can work with both sides. Indonesia, the past couple of years specifically, has been even more active with that. I think we're trying to take a proactive stance. Last year at the G20 summit in Bali in November, we hosted both President Xi from China and President Biden to one of their first offline meeting in a very long time, right? And just this past couple of days, Indonesia is the chair for ASEAN Summit. So there is an ASEAN Summit going on right now in Labuan Bajo. So we're taking a proactive stance, I think, in part of, sort of this global dialogue, I guess, right, between US and China. And from how that relates also to the startup scene, I guess, right? I think for different reasons, right? I think we've been also quite lucky that technology or the technology industry, whether it's because it's quite early as well, hasn't been that political, and hopefully that remains that way, right? So I think we don't really see directly the fact of like, oh, so this is a US investor, that's a Chinese investor, so if I have one, can I have the other one or whatnot, right? And I think hopefully that remains the same, I guess, right? So far it's been pretty neutral, if anything, yeah, at least from my view.
Yeah.
Maybe Tom? Or?
That's good news.
Yeah, no, I thought Roderick really summed it up pretty well. I just maybe add another observation. I think, I think Southeast Asia is going to be where the world comes together for, I think, the next couple of decades, just because, and I think Kishore at yesterday's fantastic panel, I think he kind of alluded to that, is, Southeast Asia in some regards is a melting pot, right? So I think you're going to see China, India, the U.S., and Europe kind of all meeting. Maybe they can't talk directly to each other because of political issues, but like the Bali summit, they're going to come out to Southeast Asia or Greater Bay in events like this, and the people-to-people, I think dialogue will happen. So I think that's one. I think there's tremendous interest, and I think Southeast Asia is going to be a big beneficiary because investments. Chinese companies are having difficulty going to the U.S. The U.S. companies going to China. Still a lot of capital. Where's it going to go? I think Southeast Asia, could be a natural destination, and I think we're starting to see that. And I think the Greater Bay Area, and particularly Macau, will have a central role to play in that. So I think that's one. The second thing that I've noticed is for Southeast Asian entrepreneurs, they really have the advantage of learning and being inspired by the developments not only in the U.S. tech ecosystem, but also the Chinese tech ecosystem and even India. So I have found the Southeast Asian entrepreneurs to be particularly nimble at adapting and taking the best from all the tech ecosystem, including Europe as well. A lot of them were trained there, educated there, coming back. And I think that open mindset, when you're not kind of constrained by the larger geopolitical tensions, but you're trying to build a business, actually I think Southeast Asia is it's open and it's liberating in certain regards because there isn't this kind of overhang of the political contest, as people were saying yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go back to the learning from China angle later, but Neil, I think the UK is increasingly a popular destination for Chinese companies hoping to expand to the West, quote unquote, because the US now obviously is not the ideal place for them with a lot of challenges. So in the past few years, we've seen nothing, which started simultaneously in Shenzhen and London, along with a lot of hardware companies going to London. So what's your perspective on these geopolitics and what opportunities that presents to the UK?
Yeah, thanks. Just to kind of echo my fellow panelists, really, I think clearly there are challenges at a geopolitical level. The US-China situation is problematic, but it creates an opportunity for not only Southeast Asia, but for the UK and for London. One of London's strengths is that it has traditionally been a very open and a very welcoming city for people from around the world and for companies from around the world. That's one of the strengths of London. We are hugely resilient because of the way that we open and that we collaborate and that we partner with companies and organizations from around the world. So that hasn't changed, despite what's going on politically. At a business-to-business level, people are pretty pragmatic. People want to do business. People want to make their companies profitable. They want to scale their companies, and if they want to do that and truly go global, then our message is, if you're in that tech space, then London has got to be part of the mix. And we're super excited about the opportunities in China, in the Greater Bay Area, for companies to invest in London. I think one of London's strengths also is the fact that we are focused and very strong at some of the subsectors and sectors that are driving the conversations and the solutions to the challenges that we face, whether that be kind of Web3 or crypto or fintech or health tech or AI or deep tech, climate tech and sustainability. London's got a really strong offer and deep growth capital kind of in those sectors to invest in technology firms. And that's kind of a super positive kind of message. I think despite the kind of challenges and despite the kind of economic headwinds that we're all facing right now, London is still the most attractive location for foreign direct investment in the world. Second to Dubai, but we kind of tick-tock every year with Dubai. I think we're second to Dubai at the moment, but there's no other city in the world that attracts more inward investment other than Dubai than London, and certainly in Europe, it's by far the leading destination. And Chinese investment in London traditionally has been super important. It's continuing to be super important, and we're seeing an increasing interest now that things are starting to open up in London as a destination for Chinese tech firms.
Yeah, what kind of Chinese tech firms are you seeing? I know there are a lot of hardware, but I also heard EVs are expanding.
Yeah, so we've worked with all of the familiar names. So over the years, so we've worked with Alibaba, we've worked with Tencent, we worked with some of the biggest financial services companies, Bank of China, and some of the other big banks in London over the years. We worked with Nothing. We were fortunate to connect with Nothing a few years ago, and delighted that they put an HQ into London just last year, I think, and now they've opened up a super exciting, incredible store in the West End of London. So companies like kind of Nothing, but as you say, I think increasingly when you see what kind of challenges we are collectively facing in the climate change space, we're seeing lots of potential for EVs. We're working with some really interesting EV companies in China, and are hoping to support them as they look at the UK and London. Battery technology also is a real kind of area of strength, but clean tech generally. When I was looking at some of the figures before coming on here, actually for the first 3 or 4 months of this year, the amount of growth capital that is invested into London, climate change companies, surpassed fintech for the first time. So it's a massive area of growth for the world and for London.
Yeah, Chinese companies are growing to Europe, but they're also traditionally they're much closer to Southeast Asia. So we've seen a lot of Chinese founders going to Southeast Asia, taking Chinese innovation models to the region. Are you still seeing that, or how are they competing now, these Chinese founders in the region? Because you also mentioned that now it's a time for local founders who make it big.
Yeah, no, there's definitely global businesses, there's local businesses as well, right? I think for Southeast Asia, right, I think the whole tech industry, the industry has maybe it's less mature, right, than the Chinese tech industry and others, right? So we've been able to learn also from others, right? And I think it's not just China, right? Of course, so China is one of the closer market to Indonesia in terms of mindset, culture, maybe proximity and whatnot. So there's a lot to learn. China versus US, China has super apps where US probably doesn't. So there's a lot of things that I think, from local entrepreneurs as well, that they've learned quite a bit from Chinese models, Chinese business models. They've copied from them as well, right? And so it's not just from China, it's India, it's US, it's Japan, it's others, right? But I think the key is, I think they've started to evolve that and then started to create hybrids or localize, I think, the models, right? So it's not just a complete copycat of things that are going on in China or whatnot, right? So I think that's the next evolution maybe, right? But for eventually, I think China was the same, right? China was copying a lot of different models as well from the US, but now I think China is a center for innovation, right? So I think hopefully we'll start to see the same wave as well, I think, for Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I'd echo Roderick's thoughts there. I think when Gobi first set up in Southeast Asia back in 2010, we were backing a lot of, I think, the first generation of the Chuhai entrepreneurs from China. That those are entrepreneurs from China, and then looking to build out into Southeast Asia. And again, we've had some success there. But what's really exciting is as Southeast Asia grows, the emergence of really great homegrown, right, tech entrepreneurs in Indonesia and Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam. You're starting to see that. And that's something I think firms like Gobi and East, right, we're really localizing our teams to also capture that. And it was just like, China back in the early 2000s, right, when the first generation of entrepreneurs, where a lot of them were the Haigui, the returnees from the US or from the UK. They were successful. But then what really kind of drove the China tech ecosystem into overdrive was the emergence, right, of all the local entrepreneurs in China that really took the torch and then grew it even further. And I think that's where we are in Southeast Asia. That's tremendously exciting. We now have companies in Southeast Asia that have grown so much they need more tech talent. They're going the reverse direction. They're going to China and acquiring teams, with the tech development R&D in China. So again, some examples of that interconnectivity, I think, between Southeast Asia and China. And again, particularly the gateway is really Greater Bay, right? And I think, again, events like this, like Beyond, can really serve a very important purpose into bringing the regions even closer.
Yeah. Tom, in the previous interview, you said that much of the investment coming out of China will be concentrated in the Greater Bay Area in the future. But historically, Beijing was the hub. All the USD funds were there, but we all know that these funds are scaling back their operations because of some US restriction laws. So yeah, why GBA now? And do you think that the GBA area is going to not replace Beijing, but going to be on par with Beijing with a new investment and tech hub?
Oh yeah, no. I think Rita, nothing will replace Beijing. Okay. I'd use it would complement, augment, right? I think we were very fortunate. I think I see at this conference, I see a lot of my peers. We were witnesses to the rise of China's kind of tech development. And again, the first wave was in Beijing, right? Zhongguancun. And we were very lucky to kind of see that around. They took advantage of the great universities, the Tsinghua Mafia, the Beida guys, and that was kind of first generation. Gobi was very lucky because we got to see the second phase, which was really centered around Shanghai, right, with the semiconductor industry. Again, leveraging the great universities there, Jiaoda, Fudan, right? And now, why Greater Bay? Well, it's because, a lot of my friends overseas, they always say, well, China's a mystery. Not really. If you just kind of read what the government says, they kind of give you the answers to the test if you just read the 5-year plan. It's very clearly stated that the Chinese government is going to build out the Greater Bay Area. And so that's why we relocated our headquarters from Shanghai to Hong Kong in 2019. Now, the timing probably wasn't the best because 2019 there were other things going on in Hong Kong. But I just think when you look at what's going on, it's clear there's a central mandate now. Are there still, challenges? Of course. You're trying to create this, super megalopolis, right, with 3 political systems, right? Macau, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, all the cities in China. But and I think what's going to emerge, though, I mean, we hear the statistics, right? 86 million people, $2 trillion GDP. But let me maybe, illustrate in a different way. Imagine you could combine the best of San Francisco, New York, the education system of Boston, right, with the old manufacturing prowess of a Detroit, the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, and now wrap it around Vegas. That's kind of what Greater Bay is going to be, right? And let's all today in the audience, let's imagine what that would be like. And I think a lot of us in the room, and we can play a small role in perhaps making that happen. And I think that's the excitement. And I think that's what's going on with Greater Bay.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, echo all of that. The Greater Bay Area is super exciting. For London, our focus, and for London and partners, our focus is around attracting tech. And that's why we have an office in Shenzhen. We opened up an office a number of years ago into Shenzhen to really kind of tap into the exciting things that are going on in the Greater Bay Area. When you look back over the last couple of years, the investment that's come out of China and into London, about 60 or 70% of that has come out of the Greater Bay Area. It's come out of Hong Kong, Macau, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. So it's super, super important for us. And going forward, some of the kind of technologies that London is really super strong on, Shenzhen and the Greater Bay Area is super strong on. There's so much potential for collaboration there. It's a hugely important area for London as well.
Yeah, and for Rod, in Indonesia, one of the biggest fintech companies, Akulaku, actually, they started from Shenzhen. It's not in your portfolio, but I'm sure you're very familiar with them. Are you seeing other similar trends of Greater Bay Area companies going to Indonesia, or are the region's companies tapping Greater Bay Area tech talent, as Tom mentioned before?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I've met William before and whatnot, right? And I think Akulaku is a good case of, like, you know, a Chinese entrepreneur that was able to pivot, move to Indonesia, start and work with local team as well, right? And local circumstances to be able to be where they are today, right? I think I can't say specifically to Greater Bay Area, to be honest. My knowledge specifically of Greater Bay Area is quite limited, but I think in the broader sense, I think there's more and more Chinese entrepreneurs that's looking at expanding also regionally, right? And I think Southeast Asia, Indonesia also in particular is an interesting market for a lot of them, right? And I think so far the industry is wide open. So I think it's you know it's open for anyone, right? So definitely, I think we're definitely going to see a lot more as well, right? I think we've been seeing a lot more interest from Chinese investors also. So over the past maybe 12 months, as things were opening, I think we were hosting a few, 2-3 investors a week, I think, in Jakarta, right? I think they were all coming down, and then, you know, they wanted to tour, they wanted to see what's going on and so forth, right? So I think we're only going to see more of that, I think, in the near future. Greater Bay Area in particular, again, I think I'm fascinated by the statistics, right? I think, you know, 86 million, 2 trillion GDP, but and you know, whatever Tom was selling or saying just now, I want all that, right? The San Francisco, New York, and Detroit, in Vegas, right? So I think that's you know, I think, but yeah, I mean, this is going to be a very important area. I see that, I think, also, right? And then how that relates also to the rest of the world and to Southeast Asia and Indonesia.
Yeah, let's dive deeper into Chinese investors going to Southeast Asia. What benefit can they bring to the region startups, and why would startups take Chinese money compared to Silicon Valley or the region's homegrown VCs? Like, it's not exclusive. They can take a bit from everyone, but why Chinese money?
Well, Rita, maybe we'll just take a step back. I don't even think we've reached a stage where Southeast Asian startups saying, why Chinese money? The Chinese money still really hasn't really come. But I know, you know, in the U.S. they were talking about the red wave, right, where the Republicans were going to sweep the House. I would actually say the red wave should be the amount of Chinese capital that's going to come to Southeast Asia. But it really still is in an early stage. We've already starting to see trends of that, right? A lot of it's starting to go to Singapore, right? And I think the trickle-down effect will be, as Chinese capital gets a little bit more familiar, Singapore is a great place, but there are other great you know, cities as well in Southeast Asia. So you're going to start seeing a trickle-down, I think, definitely to Jakarta. Kuala Lumpur. I was recently in Bangkok. You're already starting to see that. So I think the first thing is, and again, I think the institutional investors and a lot of our friends in the PE VC industry, and especially I think what happened recently, you know, people are realizing that, hey, maybe we should diversify a little, take the knowledge we've developed in China, and it's applicable potentially to Southeast Asia. So I think, again, you're going to start seeing the capital, and again, I think it's going to flow, you know, through GBA into Southeast Asia, because when you look at the landscape, and again, I was talking to some of my friends, and they're just like, hey, well, you know, it's difficult for us to invest into India, right? Can't go necessarily to the U.S., EU, you know, South America looks real interesting, but man, it's so far. And then you look, well, Southeast Asia. Wait a minute, you know, from a culture standpoint, connectivity, it's right there. And for some reason, I think Southeast Asia may have been overlooked by Chinese capital. But I would, again, I'd encourage, for those of you who are interested, it's first of all, it's a great market to expand into. And second of all, from an investment opportunity, I think the ability of a lot of the entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, they can speak Chinese or Cantonese. I think there's more of a familiarity. And I think that really hasn't been tapped into fully. We're starting to see, green shoots, but I'd expect that to start increasing dramatically in the next couple of years.
Yeah, if you're looking to expand to Southeast Asia, you know who to talk to, these two guys in the region. Yeah, Neil, I think the same question can be posed to Chinese investment in the UK. There's obviously been a lot. I recall famously Tencent and NetEase acquiring gaming studios in the country. So what do you think that, how do you think Chinese money can help facilitate innovation? And why do you think British startups are receptive to Chinese investors' capital?
I'd kind of echo, the earlier comments. I mean, the UK as a financial centre, it's a global hub, and it's welcoming capital from around the world, including China, and we're seeing that. We're seeing it starting to come again. And as you say, if you look back over the last 20 years in terms of investment into the UK from China, it's valued at about $80 billion. That's the value of the direct investment that's come out of China into the UK over the last 20 years. When you look across Europe, our nearest kind of competitor, if you like, Germany, the amount of investment that went into Germany over that same period was about 30 billion. So it's nearly 3 times as much investment has come out of China into the UK as has come into our, one of our nearest and strongest kind of competing countries in Europe. So, it's a hugely attractive market for Chinese direct investment and capital flows. And as you say, we've worked with many of the kind of big investors over the years, Tencent, NetEase, TikTok. We were working with TikTok for many years, with their HQ that went into London a couple of years ago. And we're working with many of the smaller kind of startup companies that are looking to scale rapidly. And as I say, if they want to go global and be a global player, then London, with its deep kind of growth capital, is a great place for them to be. Over the last kind of 12 months, despite the global economic kind of headwinds, when you look at the amount of just capital from multiple kind of sources that has been invested into London tech firms, in 2022, it was about $20 billion was invested into London tech kind of startups and scale-ups. That's twice the amount of growth capital that went into any other European capital. So despite the kind of challenges that we're all facing, London is really still resilient, hugely attractive to capital and to direct investment. And I think, the sectors that capital is going into is changing. It's really quite interesting to see how that kind of sector kind of mix is changing, but the volumes are still there. And that's super exciting for the future. We're now seeing a lot of capital going into, a lot of kind of growth capital going into kind of impact tech, into sustainability and climate kind of change related technologies. And kind of deep tech is receiving an awful lot. So synthetic biology, AI solutions is receiving a huge amount of kind of growth capital over the last kind of year or so, but particularly in the first 4 or 5 months of 2023.
Yeah, we're drawing to the end of this panel, so I'd like to ask each of you to give advice to Chinese startups or companies who are hoping to expand to your region. Who wants to start?
I'll take a stab. I think, again, I think, when Gobi first started in Shanghai, we saw how a lot of the great tech companies from the U.S. and Europe were coming into China. And, we saw some good things, but we also saw, what not to do, right? And sometimes, there was a certain level or assumptions. Like, it was like, oh, it's the Silicon Valley way or the highway. You got to do it our way. And, I think some of it really, helped, helped lift, standards or best practices for China. But yeah, I think for those of us who were on the ground, we realized that you needed some localization as well, right? And again, I would just advise all the great Chinese startups and tech companies here that have had a lot of success in China. You don't make the same mistake some of the U.S. guys that when they tried to come into China, in the early 2000s, 1990s. When you're coming out to Southeast Asia, also make sure 要本地化. You've got to localize, be respectful of local practices, cultures, the different languages, etc. So don't, things that work in China, a lot of it can be applicable, but you're also going to have to localize and make tweaks. So again, it's a mindset of being respectful, understanding that you may not know everything when you're coming into a new market, and then definitely finding great, I think, local partners. You will then pay less 学费, right? You don't want to be paying too many tuition fees to go make mistakes and then have to redo it again. So I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, Indonesia being the biggest in the region with a very young population, internet native is very attractive. But it's also a very diverse country culturally and religiously. So what advice would you give to a Chinese founder?
No, I mean, I think, echoing what Tom was saying, right? I think localization is definitely key as well, right? And I think the other word maybe is collaboration, I guess, right? And VCs, at least in our part of the world, is quite collaborative, right? And I think that's probably the right way, right? I think finding the right core competencies that you have, how you can partner with, and find someone you can complement with to work through that, I think could be the recipe, I guess, for success, right? I mean, Southeast Asia are generally very, open-minded, right? Collaborative people as well, right? I mean, given the diverse background that we have to what you were saying earlier, right? I mean, so that's something that, and we've seen that as well, right? I think we've seen some parts of that, what Tom was saying before, when some people from US come to China and whatnot, that they were trying to bring their own flavor of things, trying to force their own way, and then some have not succeeded, I guess, right? So I think definitely there is a big opportunity, right? I mean, the whole region is 700 million people. Indonesia is 282 million people, right? And some of the largest growth, GDP growth, are in Southeast Asia or Asia in the next few years. So definitely there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate. I think it's finding the right sort of competencies and whatnot, how to complement, and the right local partner, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and for Neil, you saw firsthand how nothing grew into an international brand. No one would think of it as a Chinese company. You call it global company, not even a British company. What do you think they did right there?
I'd like to say they found us as London and partners. But no, seriously. My advice, again, echoing the panel here, and I think that points to, the global nature of the business that we're all in, is the same advice applies to a Chinese scale-up startup firm that's looking to internationalize, if you're going to Southeast Asia or whether you're going into the UK. I think take advice, learn the lessons of others and the mistakes of others. And my team have worked with hundreds of companies over the years, and they know what works when you're looking at the UK market. They know the mistakes that companies have made over the years, and they can advise you not to make those same mistakes. So seek advice, I think. Seek a partner, and seek a partner early on. I think as you're entering a new market, there's a toss-up and a decision that you guys have to make as to whether you try and build your business remotely and try and get that first client remotely. To do that as a Chinese brand in a market like the UK, like Europe, where your brand presence isn't the same as it is in your home market, is quite a challenge. So it's a toss-up between trying to do it remotely and then convincing yourselves and your organizations that there's a market opportunity to then go and really concentrate and focus on, or putting a few people on the ground first to build the presence, to build the brand kind of visibility in a local market, and then business will come. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, but my advice would be to build that team first, build that visibility, build that brand in the UK market, and if your technology is right, then business will follow. So that's a really important thing. The other thing is think really carefully about your kind of PR and your marketing and the channels that you use. Think really carefully about the audiences, because what works in China will not necessarily work in Europe, probably won't work in Europe and won't work in the UK in terms of the channels that you use to reach your customers. So again, take advice from us and from people that we work with that are experienced in working with international startups and scale-ups as they enter the UK market to really understand and research your kind of customer base and your audiences, and then figure out what the right channels are to reach them. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, to wrap up the panel, I'm going to ask a surprise question. Can you pick any company you saw at Beyond that impresses you? And if you haven't got the chance to look around the booth, think of another Chinese company or Greater Bay Area company that has gotten your attention recently.
Can it be our own company?
Sure, if you can sell it, yes.
Well, I think one that Gobi, we had a little showcase the other day. I think one of the companies that is exhibiting here or participating, we have a couple. I mean, I'll just shout out a few. So one of them is called Sandbox VR. They do virtual reality. They've done extremely well. They got really hit during the pandemic because the retail business went to zero. And I think how Steve Tsao really kind of survived that type of a crisis. I joked with him, it was like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. They declared bankruptcy at one point. They came back, the business is better than ever, 37 locations in the US and in Europe, going to expand big in Macau, so stay tuned for that. And then just kind of really took the business to the next level. If you ever get a chance, Rita, to try it out, there are a number of locations. I think they're in Texas as well. So they're doing great. We've got other companies exhibiting. I saw ScolioScan, again, using ultrasound technology instead of radiation, X-rays, to see if you have scoliosis. I mean, there's so much going on what they call the big healthcare in GBA. Very, very exciting. We had our other CEO, Vincent, Biomed, again, digestion, your gut and brain, that link. Hey, good digestion leads to healthier lives. You got to try Biomed and their P-Gut product. I think Vincent's got a number of samples here. I don't know if he's in the audience, but so those are just some. We probably have about like 10 companies here exhibiting. There's so many. Come find me. I'll give you a whole list. But we're excited for all of them. Yeah.
That was a really good pitch.
Yeah, so I think my team's probably out there walking the floors at the moment, meeting lots of companies. I think yesterday they had conversations with about 30 or 40 different kind of firms that are really attractive companies for us, and we're looking to help them into London. We've mentioned them before, but Nothing for me is a super exciting company. I mean, they've already invested in the UK, but that company is just kind of going places. It's a familiar name for most in the room, I'm sure, but kind of watch the next few years because that's a super exciting company. And not necessarily company names, but just a couple of areas that we really kind of saw some exciting things yesterday. One is around autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. London is a real hotbed of investment into that space. Got some great kind of test facilities that are kind of testing future smart mobility solutions. So met a few kind of smart mobility companies, autonomous vehicles, and some really interesting vertical takeoff urban taxis. I can't remember the name of the company, but they were super cool. So watch this space or watch the skies in the future for those coming to a city near you. So,
Unfortunately, I only got a quick glimpse at the expo yesterday, so I'm gonna probably go more today, right? But I think, you know, to Neil's point as well, I think the autonomous vehicle, I think is, you know, I think Yicheng, I think is probably the company or whatnot. I think it's so that's fantastic. I guess there's a bunch of AI companies, a lot of the companies Tom was mentioning. I think I'm looking forward to see them today. But I think, for me so far, the best booth is the NBA booth. I think that's the one that I was really impressed with. So.
Okay, thanks everyone for being here, and make sure to check out those companies that our guests mentioned: Nothing, Sandbox, Biomed.
ScolioScan.
Yeah.
ScolioScan. We have another company. RiskCheck is out here. GBB, Great Bay Biome. So a number of companies, all with exhibits.
And you can't miss the NBA. It's right there in your face. Okay. Thanks everyone.